Okay, so we are live. I'm here with the one and only Nelson Hodges. So we're here. He's from Texas. I'm in New York, and we're going to talk about fearful dogs. I'll let Nelson tell you a little bit about him, his expertise, and then we'll get into some questions I have and answer any questions you have. Seems like we'll have a bunch of people signing on already. People are here. This is great. Thank you for joining us. So Nelson, again, thank you for taking the time to talk to all of us. Can you tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll get into the questions.
Okay. As far as the dog world goes, I've been working with animals for probably on order of 40, 41, 42 years, somewhere in that neighborhood, professionally, meaning taking money for it,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot longer uh, before that. But uh, I worked with dogs, cats, birds, all sorts of animals
Yeah.
early on, and probably I'm guessing 30, 35 years ago, somewhere in that time range, really started specializing in just dogs, and the got into the Siberian Husky world through a
Mm-hmm.
number of different means, and so that's how I got the moniker the Husky guy. I've always had Huskies since that point in time. And so I learned a lot about the primal instinctual nature of those breeds and the northern breeds. And but as far as what I do, my specializations, I work with all breeds.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Enjoy working with all breeds, and each one is a little bit different because their motivations, their brain and DNA
Yeah.
are slightly different as far as and by DNA I mean how the brain is made up, what compartments are more important to what breed. Bloodhound is different than a Jack Russell,
Sure.
so that's that has always fascinated me in the motivations of each of the animals, and I focus mainly on reaching the brain of the dog rather than teaching the dog, stupid human tricks. So, and I don't mean that by being stupid.
Definitely.
You know,
More about the
it's
relationship.
well, it is. It's all about relationship, and that starts with trust. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
the fearful and feral animals, they don't trust humans.
Yeah.
They may not even trust other dogs or any other animal, depending on the situation they've been put in. So, over the years, I've probably had, I would guess, 40% of the dogs that I've worked with are fearful or feral, fearful animals,
Mm-hmm.
and probably 40% were uh, aggressive. And I mean aggressive, I don't mean reactive, I mean
Mm-hmm.
aggressive dogs.
Truly aggressive.
Dogs that were, yeah, I mean, I get the guys that nobody else wants to handle or could or willing to spend the time to handle, I'll put it that way. Um, so that's what I made my career on. And the other
Mm-hmm.
20% were dogs that people thought were that way,
Mm-hmm.
but they were actually easy dogs. I kind of like those, but that 20% in the middle that people just misunderstood. And so, really working with the humans, on a client basis, um, I've learned over the years how to communicate to different types of people. A little bit of a background in human psychology,
Mm-hmm.
so um, you know, working with human perception and language, being able to communicate in different ways to different people to try to reach them. And I've taught in a number of different subjects. One that some of the people who are probably watching right now know is martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
Been doing that for 50 years and teaching thousands and thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so learning how to communicate to people over years of time, some that were my students, some that were, federal agencies or whatever else. And so that's really what it is. It's about communication. You can't have
Yeah.
trust without proper communication. And so that's where, I learned. I honestly, I've learned more from fearful and feral animals than I have any other type.
Yeah.
Because it's you see an immediate response and effectiveness of how you communicate to them. So they are the ones that have taught me to fine tune and hone in on how to communicate properly to dogs specifically.
Can
So,
you talk a little bit on when you're dealing or coming across a fearful dog, the first initial meetings with new people, new environments? How can we help them get a little more comfortable versus just the average happy-go-lucky dog? The big
right.
main differences that you definitely see and the mistakes a
Yeah.
lot of times we make.
Well, the first thing is the people trying to relate to the dog in human terms, console the dog, or to even approach the dog. If you observe dogs, and the way I learned to do things with dogs is, um, frankly, be like a dog. So I watch dogs,
Mm-hmm.
I observe them, how they approach each other, how the responses they get in the interactions that they have back and forth. Their language is a back and forth signal, signal back, signal initiator, signal back, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so they come to an agreement. It's testing and agreements over what the intent is of that animal. And so a fearful dog doesn't want to have anything to do with you initially.
Mm-hmm.
And most humans make the mistake of um, you know, trying to show the dog actively that they're not a threat, which in fact is counter to what the dog is observing. It's already afraid of you. And if you try to approach it, if you, uh, take a specific stance, approach, proximity, staring at the animal,
Mm-hmm.
then they're going to see you as more of a threat. You are actually, uh, putting anxiety in them because they're already fearful and distrusting of you. So initially, what you want to do with a dog like that, if you're in a situation where the dog can be like in a yard or a room or something like that. By the way, yards are better than rooms because one, it's dog's natural environment to be outside in nature. Two, in a room, there's less of a chance of escape, and so you've heightened the threat level that they perceive. Um, and three, you're closer to them just by virtue of the fact of the size of the space, which again increases their distrust and anxiety because you can get to them in 2 steps instead of being 80 feet away. So they're on heightened alert. So it's really not conducive to have them in a small room with you unless you simply sit down, ignore them, and look out the window. And by sit on their level, not on your level.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Elevation has meaning, and the way you present yourself has meaning. So typically, humans use our eyes an awful lot. That's our primary sense for
Yeah.
detecting things. And the unfortunate thing is, sorry, adjusting things
Okay.
here. We use our eyes and we stare at the dog. And a stare for a predator is a predatory stare.
Mm-hmm.
So we use our eyes an awful lot to try to communicate or to try to observe this animal when in fact you shouldn't look at the animal at all initially. So it's almost like, a lot of people, and even I have used the term ignore the dog, but you're not ignoring the dog. You need to be aware of where the dog is, what its senses are, etc. But you need to project a, you basically need to be like another dog with that dog. That dog doesn't care about the other dog. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
want to approach it. It doesn't care if it exists. It's not trying to make friends with it. All of those things. So initially, it's simply gaining the trust of the dog by being able to show it that you're not a threat. You
Yeah.
don't see the animal as a threat either. So it's it's almost counterintuitive to what humans want to do, which is to console.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I learned from you, and I do a lot when I enter a new home with a new fearful dog, is I don't try to pet it, bend over it. I just sit there. I have them let it out of the room, and just let it investigate me. I don't try to do any movements. I keep very still. I don't try to stare it down, and I tell them this is a conversation, like you said. So a lot of times people want to go right away and pet, or the dog sniffs them or gives them a little lick, and they go, "Oh, dog loves me now. Let me
yeah.
go over its head, pet it," and all these things that can make them more fearful. So, what would you
So
recommend when
here's
somebody?
so here
Yeah.
so here's one thing. Here's an example. Okay, so an accountant, you know, sorry for those accountants out there. I'm picking a profession where it doesn't require a lot of physicality. How about
Hmm.
that? And so an accountant goes into a biker bar. Long do you think it's going to take for that accountant to become comfortable with the bikers?
Very true.
And that's kind of a good example. So,
Hmm.
you know, you're not, you're gonna sit in a corner, and if some biker comes up to you, you think you're dead.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
something we talked about when I contacted you about a Jindo named Gus that I
Yeah.
wanted to talk to you about. Very interesting case. And you talked about the routine, the steps in the routine that are really important to gain that trust um, over time with these fearful dogs. And one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is I do get a lot of dogs from the south that are fearful, but I'm getting a lot of dogs from the Korean meat trade. And a lot of them are Jindos. And if you could, this is
Yeah.
going to be a multi-pronged question, but if you could talk a little bit about the fearful dogs and how we gain their trust. And then the second part will be Jindos. Why are they different? Why are they different than the average dog? And we're getting a lot of them now, and they're not the average happy-go-lucky lab. They're great
No,
dogs,
no.
but they're different. Can you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about both of those parts?
Sure. Well, the first thing, to gain anybody's trust, you have to be trustworthy. What does that mean? It means you have to be composed, calm, and consistent. If you become emotional, fly off the handle, um, do weird human things, make noises, and do weird things with your hands. You think about things in terms of the dog's side, and that's how you present yourself. So if you're actually doing things that the dog, number one, can't replicate itself, meaning pick up things with your hands, make weird noises, do all those human activities. If you do a lot of that, then the dog, you're actually separating yourself from that dog's universe that much more. It's fearful for
Mm-hmm.
a reason, because humans are humans. And so the more dog like you can behave, and the more understandable you are to them. So it's all about you kind of acquiescing to their world and their understanding to begin with, not asking it to overload. You can't, yeah, well, you can flood, meaning overwhelm,
Mm-hmm.
a fearful dog. It may or may not work depending on what trust level you have with the dog to begin with. A
Yeah.
lot of people just say, well, you're just going to have to learn to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, that doesn't necessarily engender trust. What it does is say, okay, I'm not dead in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, what we want to do is build up a cumulative effect instead of getting an instant gratification. So, what we do is we behave in certain ways that are more dog like, and I don't mean, get down on all fours and sniff butts and wag your tail, uh, meaning our behavior and our intent. I don't talk to dogs uh, very little. It's to get their attention, or to
Mm-hmm.
tell, to give a signal of some sort, a simple signal like, good boy. That's about it.
Yeah.
Uh, but because I don't want to confuse the dog. I don't want them having to reach in parts of their brain that, frankly, they don't have. They cannot replicate human speech. So, it's kind of a waste of time when you can gain their trust in a much more rapid way. Um, Within those behaviors, then, what you're trying to do is you're trying to present a routine, a daily
Mm-hmm.
routine, a weekly routine, even a monthly routine that dogs can understand and can count on. That's really what you're trying to do is you're trying to present something that the dogs can count on. Therefore, they can learn to trust the situations that they're in or that you put them in. So the first thing is they have to learn to trust you,
Mm-hmm.
meaning your actions and behaviors, and even that first tiny little increment of trust. That's what you're trying to build upon. And once you get that little increment, you, depending on how severe the case is, and that's where, having had so many of the fearful animals over the years, I learned where their edge is based on their behavior. So you don't want to push them over the edge because then you break trust, and it takes 5-10 times longer to gain that back. But so what you have to do is you provide a structure, a routine. That's what the structure is, a routine that they can live within and be comfortable within that. And then you start adding little things when they're capable of handling it. The dog will tell you when it's capable of handling it. Then you learn also later on when they're trying to manipulate the situation, and you say, "No, I know you can handle this," and you move them forward. So that, obviously, that takes some experience to do. But so the routine, um, is the structure for these dogs. Daily routine. We get up, we go out, we go potty, we come back in, we eat, then we go do some activity together. We do these things, stuff that the dog can count on, and dogs can sort of tell time, based on where the sun is,
Yeah.
the time of day. They have a sense of time, kind of like we do. They don't have a long-term sense of time like we do. We can't.
Mm-hmm.
They can not imagine a million years from now. We can, and so there's differences. But if you put it on their level and their understanding, then they can accept those routines and structures. That way, they know they can live within that, and you have some basis with which to involve yourself in their world and
Yeah.
gain their trust. On the Jindo side of things, the Jindos are primal instinctual animals, much like a Basenji or a New Guinea singing dog or a Siberian Husky or these ancient and basal breeds. They have a different mindset than our what we call European domestic dogs. I don't call those dogs domestic dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and part of it is just how long they've been around. They, Huskies, for instance, since I know a heck of a lot about them, New Guinea singing dogs, dingoes, different animals.
Mm-hmm.
We did not create them. Uh, they kind of they were a natural dog breed. We've certainly influenced them over thousands of years, but they go back thousands of years. And the Jindo comes from the same line as the Husky and that sort of northern breed dog, the uh, Spitz dogs.
Yeah.
And so what man has done over the years is um, we've essentially taken bits and pieces of different dogs that had different predilections, specialties, or interests, or motivations and drives, and we've bred them with another one that has those similar ones to serve us better. The ancient breeds, we didn't create them; they
Yeah.
they exist without us, and so therefore we have to relate to them more on their level than a lab or a German Shepherd or whatever else. Those
Sure.
guys will work for us and with us, want to. they're loyal, they look to us for direction, and those dogs will just flip you off because they know how to be a dog.
So also I've
That
heard a lot of times, yeah, Jindos also and Huskies don't always get along with other dogs for those similar reasons. You were talking about that as well, that they
yes.
sort of maybe have a different language per se you were talking about.
Yeah, not necessarily different language, but they have they retain more
Mm-hmm.
of an uh, continuum of language, more wolf uh, communication, I'll put it that
Okay.
way. Um, and so, it's a wider communication system and more sophisticated in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
cases. And
Okay.
so, a boxer or a Spanish Spaniel or something like that may not understand those signals that these more ancient breeds have, and sometimes they get in trouble that way. If well, I hate to use the example of dog parks because I don't like dog parks. They're kind of, as I'm not, I'm not a radical against dog parks. It's just a stupid human idea. But uh, if you go into a dog park and there's a bunch of dogs there, and you'll see certain types of dogs packed together, you will always see huskies go with huskies. They
Mm-hmm.
will always find another husky, and same thing with similar, several breeds. So they
Mm-hmm.
understand each other better. They behave the same way. Their motivations are the same, so it makes sense. It's just like birds of a feather flock together. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about the everyday dog owner that are adopting these fearful dogs. And like I mentioned before, Korean Canine Rescue, I'm working with them right now. So they're bringing a lot of dogs. They're doing a great job trying to help them assimilate. But also I get a lot of dogs from down south, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
they're not another country. But to some of them, it almost feels like when they come to Brooklyn or Manhattan, it is another country, another world.
Well, Brooklyn is a different country.
So basically,
Brooklyn, Queens.
it is. You brought a lot of things I didn't even realize. I go, well, I go to Prospect Park. It's country, and he goes, no, there are planes going overhead. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I don't even notice that anymore.
Yeah.
But
Cars,
so I get a lot
buses,
of
the
these.
L train. Yeah.
Yeah, the trains going underneath, shaking ground. So again, I look with a lot of rescues that get dogs from down south. So from Dallas, Alabama, that's where my dogs are from, Georgia. And I feel a lot of these dogs might never even left the backyard or the home, might never been on
Right.
leash, never seen all these noises from the traffic, the roads, all this craziness. They come up here because it is a worse situation, what I hear down there with the overcrowding of the shelters and things. They come
It
up
is.
here and we want to give them all the love. We want to give them all the freedom in the world and give them everything. Talk to them, tell them how much better their life's going to be. But it takes them a while to adjust. So one of the things I want to talk about is the adjustment period for a fearful dog coming into the new home from the shelter, from a different environment. I know you mentioned something around 21 days, but just about the adjustment period and what it takes and what might never happen when a dog comes from a fearful environment, calm country environment to a city environment.
Okay. Well, so I will say for a quote unquote normal dog, one that isn't fearful or super aggressive or any of those things. What I've seen over the years, because I used to. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm focusing on my institute now. So, but I used to take in severe case dogs into my home. I don't crate and I don't kennel. I'm
Mm-hmm.
the antichrist. So, um, so they come in to my home, my pack, and I see the same patterns of time over and over again, and you can almost predict it. And I've talked to literally thousands of people on the phone, helping them with their cases, whether they're trainers or otherwise, all over the world over the years. And um, I, based on what they're telling me, what's happening in the moment, I can just about predict to the day how long they've had the dog.
Interesting.
And the reason is because there are certain patterns that both humans and dogs become comfortable with in certain time frames. And again, going through patterning, and that's really what it's all about, is repatterning the brain. That's what
Mm-hmm.
rehabilitation is. And so, with regard to that structure or the routine, if you go through 2 to 3 days of cycles of what should be a an understandable routine, if it's different every time, you're creating a longer time period for the dog to adjust and become comfortable. So if you can stay consistent and have same patterns within 2 to 3 days, the dog goes, okay, I get it. I see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Because when a dog comes in, just like a human, who's in charge? What's going on? What are the patterns? Am I going to get eaten?
Mm-hmm.
All of those things. Can I count on having food, shelter, water?
Right.
That's really survival. It's food, shelter, water. And so once they see those patterns within that 2 to 3 day time period, they, depending on their confidence level, it may be 2 days, it may be 3 days. That 72-hour period, that's the testing of these different things. You will also, I always expect an incident or two within those first 72 hours. Well, what do I mean by an incident? A
Mm-hmm.
test of some sort. If it's an aggressive dog, are they going to test my other dogs or me? And you have to handle it. You have to know how to handle it immediately,
Yeah.
and then it's over. And then they learn, oh, I can trust this situation. I'm not, because humans are the ones that hang on to the emotion
Yeah.
and recreate situations down the line. Um, but so you have a 2 to 3 day period. You have a 7 to 10 day period where they settle in and go, okay, I've got this. And when they say, when you see that behavior of I've got this, they become confident within themselves
Mm-hmm.
and say, I'm comfortable in this situation. And so that's where you see a lot of dogs take over or try to take over because they don't see leadership in that household from the
Yep.
dogs or the human. And that's when I get phone calls
Mm-hmm.
uh, because a lot of situations are misunderstood by the humans. When you have other dogs in the household previously, you've already negotiated all the positions and all of the things that are important to the dog during that time period. And then a new dog comes in, it doesn't see what it understands.
Mm-hmm.
It goes, okay, this whole group's a bunch of idiots. I got to take over because we got to survive. You always go back to what is survival, and that tells you what's in the dog's brain.
What?
And so that 7 to 10 day period is an important one to establish the patterns, the behaviors, and frankly, positions within the pack. In other words, what role do you play?
Mm-hmm.
Within a 21-day period, the 21 days is actually a brain learning situation or repatterning. So you
Mm-hmm.
introduce a new idea, for instance, or a new concept or a new behavior, a new action, a new pattern, whatever it is. If you stay consistent with that, with those signals, those behaviors, etc., that animal, us, dogs, whatever, it takes 21 days for it to initially become a new patterning. That doesn't, and all that is, well, there's physical structure that happen within the brain, myelin sheathing, all sorts of stuff. If people want to get into that, there's courses they can take somewhere, and if there aren't, I guess I can offer them. But
What are
um,
some tips you can recommend for when these dogs come into the new home to set that structure, to set that role as a leader within the home?
well, okay, so here's the way I describe leadership. Leadership is composure under fire. No matter what happens, you've got it. It, meaning you're composed, you're calm, you have the answers, you take care of it, it's over. And that's where uh, humans hanging on to these different expectations and emotions and stuff like that actually creates a very bad situation for that dog coming in. Um, the yeah. how deep do we want to get into that?
No, not that
That's a
deep.
pretty important. No, that's a pretty important. I mean, that's a pretty important part of this.
Yeah.
Is now what I focus on mainly with working with human clients.
Hmm.
I'll go over their homes, and I spend probably 80% of my time educating the human,
Yep.
not the dog. Dog can change in 5 minutes, not the dog. And I don't mean that humans are the problem. What I mean is humans and dogs are two different species. We
Hmm.
communicate differently. We have different languages. We have different behaviors. We're idiot human primates, as I joke. We pound our chest and do monkey neck sounds and use our front paws for weird things and stand on our hind legs and we stink. Okay, and so um, that gap, it's the gap in understanding between humans and canines that causes all of the problems between the two. Doesn't mean I don't mean it causes all problems with dogs, but it causes the problems between the two
Hmm.
species. And so the misunderstandings, the wants of the human side to just love the dog and console it and get emotional and
Hmm.
all that stuff, those are all weaknesses in a dog. And so they're not going to follow that. So leadership is really uh, being more dog like in behavior. Dogs don't, a leader just goes where it wants to go and the others follow.
Hmm.
But you have to gain trust of the others. So you have to be understandable, consistent, so that they understand that. That's part of routine and structure. So
Hmm.
you must be involved in what they do daily. You have to direct by saying, basically getting up, going outside. It's time to go potty, guys. And so
Yep.
you all go out together. You don't send the dogs out, you go out.
Yeah.
And then you look over the pack, not at them, over them to protect them. In their mind, they're living like it's 20,000 years ago. They don't know about our civilization. They don't know that our neighbors aren't going to break down the fence and come over
Hmm.
here and kill us and take our territory. They have no idea. That's why they behave the way they do. And so until you get a pattern and an understandable pattern that they can test, see that it works, and understand it, that's what you're working on as far as leadership goes.
Okay.
So your behavior has to be, you must be composed around them. I
Yep.
joke that I only have one feeling and you can't hurt it. But that's kind of the way you have to be.
Yeah.
Uh, and another saying that I came up with years ago was you have to like the dog that just bit you or you can't help them.
Yeah. Can't hold it against
So,
them. Yeah.
no, not at
Yeah.
all. It's just being a dog. That's it. It's
Yeah.
a response, and you probably made a mistake.
Yeah. Learn how to
So,
understand what they're telling you better as understanding their language. And
yes,
because they're not going to talk to you and tell you they're uncomfortable, but there's other ways their body is going to say, hey, that's too much. Stop that. Don't do that. And to me, that's
yes.
one of the hard things for the humans to understand. The dog is speaking to you. It's just not in the same language.
100% of the time, and
Yeah.
they're studying you 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean staring at you with longing eyes. It means that they're aware of your presence. Uh, they have different senses than we do too. I'm
Yeah.
not going to go deep into that.
Hmm.
They literally see differently. They hear differently, or
Hmm.
more in depth, and they certainly smell a
A
lot
lot
differently.
better.
Yeah.
So
So
I have a quick question
yeah,
here relating on the
yeah.
topic from Lisa Wicks. She's talking about any recommendations of transporting these fearful
Right.
dogs from the pound or to the rescue facility. So from the shelter to either
Yeah.
foster or where they're going to go. Because, they're in the shelter, that environment, there a lot of times can be shut down. How do we help transport that? I know you've also dealt with a lot of that as well.
Yeah. So from the standpoint of humans are always in a rush.
Yeah.
We're always on our own time scale. Dogs don't understand it, don't care, don't trust that, especially fearful ones.
Hmm.
So what you have to do is you have to take your time and I'll call it cajole.
Okay.
you know, ask the dog. I always say another one of my sayings: ask the dog don't tell it, but ask it until you get the right answer. So, in other words, the reason I tell trainers, everybody else, to ask the dog is because you're in what you're doing is you're trying to communicate to them in the way they understand it instead of just forcing a dog to do something. Yeah, it takes less time to force the dog to do something, but there's no communication, there's no understanding other than you have to do this.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's necessary, but a lot less than humans think. And so, once you get an initial communication, an initial, I'll give an example.
Sure.
Um, Using a leash to get a dog from out of the shelter to the car. How about that? Okay. So you don't just drag the dog and throw it up in the car. Um, that may be what you want to do because you only have 30 minutes to get it from here to there. Well,
Yeah.
that's your own fault. Uh, that animal is a living sentient being at deserve respect for who and what it is, and give it the time to. You're trying to communicate with it and say, okay, I want you to come with me, and I'm going to be emphatic about it. You're not going to not go, but I'm going to take the time to try to communicate with you. If it takes me 5 minutes to get out the front door, it will take me 2 minutes to get to the car because the dog is
Yeah.
beginning to see. I take that time initially. Again, it's all cumulative effect of trying to communicate. It sees you're not going to kill it, it can't run away. You are taking the time not to feel sorry for the animal, but simply say, follow me, come with me, and you maintain total composure. Dogs react a lot to our emotions and our behaviors and actions. If you are calm and composed and you simply lead this dog, it will begin to follow you because it can trust you. You have no ill will toward it
Mm-hmm.
during time. So those first 5 minutes of time of establishing how the relationship is going to go
Mm-hmm.
with respect makes a ton of difference all the way along.
Definitely. So.
I just did a workshop down in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, a one-day seminar. It was one day. It was for rescue groups, and we limited it to 30 people because that was the space that we had. And we had
Sure.
33, something like that. So, um, in the midst of the end exercise at the end of the afternoon, I was handed a dog. Didn't recognize it. They just they handed me the dog Leash. It was a young German Shepherd that was
Mm-hmm.
extremely skittish, fearful. You take the leash and it would immediately dart to the end of the leash and
Sure.
stay behind you and all of that stuff. And within 10 minutes, um, I basically just walked with the dog outside.
Mm-hmm.
Asked it to, after 5 minutes, I started asking it to go over and sniff something by sniffing it myself and then using my hand to sweep towards that. And initially it was didn't want to, but it started to see that I was what I was asking, and so we had a brief conversation. Came back to where most of the people were. I had probably 15 feet between me and the next person, and they were all observing this. And so I just I squatted down at the dog's level, which is
Mm-hmm.
important, and not to tower over it. Um, and and then I was just talking to the people, and the dog was off to my side. Uh, Initially, then she turned around, and I touched her on the hindquarters and just left my hand there, just softly touched.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, she looked around like, what are you doing? And I ignored her action by being calm, composed, and simply carrying on with what I was doing prior to. It was just
Mm-hmm.
a touch, it was a connection. That's all it was. And then the dog came back around, and I began just kind of a light touch on the back, sitting with her back to me, actually,
Sure.
which is a trust level.
Yeah.
And initially, if you look at it in a certain way, because she was facing away from me and I touched her, that was a break of trust. But the
Hmm.
regain of trust was, in other words, she was going, "What are you doing to me?" And she saw my hand didn't move when she whipped around. When she looked, my hand didn't move. It didn't add pressure. It didn't do
Hmm.
anything. It laid there. In other words, I presented myself where I'm not fearful of you. I have no ill intent. There's no action that I'm going to take if you whip around. You can bite my hand if you want to. I'm not going to
Hmm.
take it away. That sort of thing. In other words, um, I my actions from behind are the same as if you're facing me with your tools, which are your teeth.
Hmm.
I'm I have no ill intent towards you, and I don't fear you either. Those are the
Hmm.
two signals you're giving them. And so within the next 2 minutes, literally the dog backed in between my legs as I was squatting down, and I massaged her. She laid down, and then she laid on her side, and then she rolled over and wanted to play with me.
Nice.
So within
Is this
10
that?
minutes, you can change the dog.
Is
It's
this a
changed
German
the idea.
Shepherd
It's the
that's in the picture?
relationship. It's the relationship that you build between that animal. Doesn't mean it's going to accept everything that you put it into, and it doesn't mean that you
Hmm.
change the dog to where it accepts anybody. That takes time. That's reprogramming the brain. I'm sorry, what?
No, is this the German Shepherd that we have in the picture for this event that you had a series of
Yeah,
pictures
as a
through?
matter of fact, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
that's
was.
that dog,
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
that series of pictures basically shows some of this
yes.
process that you're talking about. Very nice. On the 21 days, Roseanne had a question here. Do you mean the repattering only starts at 21 days, or does it begin prior to that and solidify at 21 days ish?
Right. Now it begins initially, immediately, and you're
Okay.
trying to create a new pattern through the brain, a new sequence of synapse connection, essentially, a new understanding. And so at 21 days, it begins to solidify. Now it will
Hmm.
go away if you don't continue the pattern because something else becomes more important to the brain, and so. So you need to continue that patterning. So for instance, a 3 week board and train, 3 weeks
Hmm.
is just enough time to get that sequence to begin that pattern.
Yeah.
So if you give a dog back at that point and the people, your client doesn't continue with that patterning,
Hmm.
guess what? It's lost.
Yeah.
Will the dog remember it and replicate it in situ? In other words, with you in a situation it understands and remembers? Yes, it can because it can recall that, but it doesn't become a major pattern in the brain. Okay. So
Yeah.
21 days is the beginning point. That is just it. So with the dogs that I work, especially the fearful dogs. So we talked about 3 days, 7 to 10 days, 21-day initial patterning.
Hmm.
There's a 30-day period that the dog feels comfortable, starts saying, "Okay, this is my pack, this is my home." So in 30 days, it becomes comfortable with that situation. After about 3 months, about a 90-day period, then it says, "This is my pack, period.
Yeah.
This is it." And you can see a change of character. You can see the full character of the dog at that time period. Now, that's a normal dog. With fearful dogs, just throw away timelines.
Yeah.
They're going to go through those same patterns, those same sequences, but instead of 3 days, it may take 2 years
Yeah.
with really severe dogs. And I've had dogs from that were supposedly fearful from 8 days to really serious dogs up to 2 years. So
Yeah. Well, that brings
most
up.
most of the ones that are fearful and bite humans, I can get through to them in that 90-day period.
Mhm.
With me, I trust them. I trust them in any situation with me. But to proof behavior, not proof an action, to proof behavior with anybody, anywhere, anytime, it may take 6, 8, 9 months. And so that's where a lot of people don't want to work with fearful or feral animals because it does take more time.
Long time. Well, that brings me up. I know we've talked about this with a lot of these dogs that coming into people's homes, and so they're fearful. So people immediately think, oh, they must have been abused or this or that. They might have been, especially on a
Right.
Korean meat trade. That's more of a possibility with what they went through and there.
Right.
But in general, they get these dogs in hoping, as we talked about, we're going to give them love and affection and it'll solve it. And some dogs do get better, and some dogs it's just time. But I like to give the example to many people. It's like having someone who's an introvert, right, and expecting them to just if we keep taking them to parties, they'll be the life of the party. So they're not. People are going to be who they're going to be based on their upbringing, their genetics, and so on and so on. So
Yes.
I want you to, if you can, speak to all these people that have these dogs. And you did a great job right now just talking about the time. It could take years. It could take months. It could take weeks. Depends on the dog and the situation. What are the expectations people can have with these dogs to help advocate, manage, and help them move forward? And basically what it's like living with dogs that are fearful at different levels, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. That's a wide-ranging
Yes, I
subject
know.
in
So,
itself. Yeah. So the dog is going to tell you the severity of it. For a professional who's used to working with fearful dogs,
mhm,
they're going to let you know when they're ready to move forward. The problem is moving forward is humans see some action that they haven't seen before where they go, oh, you're over it,
mhm,
and then they just want to act like it's normal and do things and overwhelm the dog. That's the problem. They will overwhelm the dog. What
mhm,
you get is you get these plateaus of they'll test. You'll see that test in even small, tiny little increments, and that's where, working with a number of them over the years, you begin to see uh, what they are testing. Am I gonna lose my life if I step a foot closer? If I take this kibble from this guy's hand, is he
mhm.
going to grab me and kill me? Those are the sorts of things that you'll see these little increments. They'll test and it'll scare them, or they'll back off and they'll see what the reaction is. And for super fearful animals, that plateau may be 2 months for that
Yeah,
tiny little thing, and then it becomes less and less and less. That's that cumulative effect of that testing and that plateau, and then over time it starts doing,
yeah,
the raising up of that. And so humans make the mistake of trying to they want, it's a human ego thing, they want this to happen on their
mhm,
time frame, and they just want to love the dog. That's
yeah,
why they're helping it. They want to
of
feel
course.
good about it and all of those things. And we feel bad for the dog, so we want it to just be normal, whatever our normal is. Problem is, that's not normal for a dog.
Mhm,
And so, it's much like, it's like, you know, men and women who've been in combat
yeah,
and then coming back to the world, as we called it,
mhm,
and you just little things. You don't put your shades down in the window in your car because you're looking at rooftops.
mhm.
You know, Now, there aren't any snipers or RPGs coming
Yep.
from rooftops of the office buildings here in the United States, mostly. So, um, but those are brain patterns that happen in traumatized situations. And
Yeah.
traumatized situations create hardened, hardwired brain patterns. It takes a long time, years if ever, to get over those things. Well, that's the wrong word actually. It's not get over. It's because you don't get over it. You simply begin a new understanding of the
Yeah.
situation you're in. So those hard traumatizations, whether that's simply I was on a chain in a backyard with little interaction of anything around a tree, and that was my existence. So everything outside of that universe right there is a fearful thing.
Yeah.
Um, I was in a tiny little crate being bred for years without any interaction with other dogs, humans, or anything else except for
Hmm.
bad stuff. And my puppies were taken from me, literally taken from me. So
Hmm.
that's the only existence they know. It's a different existence, it's a different understanding. So to repattern a brain to let it learn, I won't say teach it, to let it learn a new existence is literally starting over.
Yeah.
And so you have to allow the time that they can handle certain things. So, take away the human ego, take away the human wants and drives and desires, and look at it from the dog side of things.
Hmm.
And, you know, if you if you do push a dog over the edge, back off from it. Matter of fact, I have a lot of conversations, uh, phone conversations with professional trainers that call me up and say, well, we did this and this and this, and this dog is, we're starting to have problems. And some of the times my answer is back off.
Hmm.
Don't do that. Go to a lower distraction, lower threat level for a while. Regain the trust of the dog. Allow it to actually process this. Then
Hmm.
you can move forward. So a lot of times, humans want to involve the dog in a lot of things and think that's socialization when in fact we're pushing it over the edge.
Yeah.
So
So
did I
on that
answer
note, yeah, no, that was great. It answered a lot of things. Actually, leads to the next question from Gina. She is the woman who started Korean Canine Rescue, who I work with, does a lot of great work there. So she's asking, what are some effective techniques rehabbing a fearful dog who's reached the level of curiosity, takes treats but no touch yet?
that? Okay. So who is the touch for? That's my.
Amen.
It's for the human.
Right.
The dog doesn't want to. Look, dogs. Okay, so first let's address that, and the reason I focus on that is because that's the human want, not the dog's want.
Mm-hmm.
So dogs want to just exist. It's again, everything goes back to survival, food, water,
Mm-hmm.
shelter. That's what the initial thing is for survival. Understandable and controllable environment is the second part. So, trying to control territory, trying to control these things. If this, you know, this big hairless monkey that chatters all the time and does weird things, that's the size of a bear, is constantly uh, impacting my personal
Mm-hmm.
territory and trying to get to me, I am going to reject that. So the bribing with food is different than using it to begin to create a new pattern of trust. Um, just getting a dog close to you by using food is not the right reason to use food. So, matter of fact, the quicker way to do it is to have them literally next to you with food in your hand or food on the ground or whatever else, and you're just sitting there as if you're disinterested. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a normal thing. You don't care about the dog being there, and then it will come sit with you at some point, sit or lay or stand there, looking away from you, maybe in the same direction, not at you because that's a distrust,
Mm-hmm.
but looking away from you and just being with you. And that's an important thing to learn, is to understand that dogs are just with other dogs. If they haven't encountered humans other than in a bad situation, dogs just are with other dogs. They don't have expectations of them. I've never seen a dog pet another dog.
Yep.
Never. I've never seen a dog be a Pez dispenser and spit out treats to another dog. Uh, they're not asking. They're not, and don't take this wrong out there
Mm-hmm.
in ephemeral land out there, uh, but you know, being a Pez dispenser and bribing a dog to come close doesn't mean it trusts you. It means it trusts you for that activity and that action only. Dogs are used to encountering each other side to side, not
Mm-hmm.
over the top. Over the top, the way we like to put our hands over the top of a dog is a threat. Dog on top of another dog is a dog fight. So
Mm-hmm.
stop trying to pet the dog. Instead, if you encounter it side by side, if it gets close enough and trusts you long enough, and that's where don't initially just reach out. Don't
Mm-hmm.
don't keep trying to reach out for it. Let it gain the trust in you. And at some point, you'll have an encounter where you touch side by side, and that's where you should initiate touch. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Feral dog. They did um, a little documentary trying to change Dallas Animal Control or Dallas Animal Services
Mm-hmm.
procedures because of the way this dog was captured with a cattle dart. And it actually wasn't captured with the cattle dart. It lodged in the shoulder blade and the scapula,
Mm-hmm.
and the dog escaped anyway. And 3 days later, 2 or 3 days later, of course, it was infected, and it came up to a lady who had kept the dog in the area so they could capture it as far as feeding and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
dog it was in trouble and needed help, and that was the only way it could ask for it. So they were able to capture the dog through some pretty interesting things, and they reached out to a specific rescue because of a specific breed, and they said, just call Nelson. So I agreed to after I think 5 days or so, letting the injury heal a bit after they put it on the table. I agreed to come over and work with the dog on a weekly basis. And the weekly basis was whatever I did, I would teach them what to do, how to do it for that entire week, and then we'd go to the next step. Um, so there were camera crews there, cameras all over the place, and I asked them to back off a little bit. It was in a vet back kennel area, and there were other dogs in there barking and stuff. So this feral animal, it really was. It was born feral, and was actually this female was head of a 15 dog urban feral pack,
Mm-hmm.
and they had captured all the other dogs in the pack, and she was too smart for them to capture. They finally had to do this darting. Anyway, um, so camera crews were all excited and everything. They're going to get this and learn all the secrets and everything else. So I got in the kennel. Kennel was maybe 8 feet deep and about 3 feet wide,
Mm-hmm.
and of course the dog goes to the back. I sit down at the front, and I keep scooting. It took me 2 hours to scoot to where the dog couldn't go anywhere else, was laying down, facing the same direction I was. So facing, you know, I was facing this way, the dog was facing this way, right
Mm-hmm.
next to me. And it took me 2 hours um, to finally touch the guard fur on this dog on the side.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an immediate head whip around like this, about a second and a half of, do I bite you? Are you
Mm-hmm.
trying to hurt me? All these other things. And I just kept my hand there calmly and wasn't looking at her. So she was studying me for about a second and a half. And then she just turns her head back away. And then I start just touching her on the side. I was first human to contact her, touch her. Um, I will say, without, and I don't mean this in that way, uh, not in anger or not trying to capture, not trying to control. And so, you know, in 20 minutes, I was massaging down her back.
Nice.
Now, she didn't necessarily like it, and she wasn't suddenly, she wasn't suddenly domesticated. But within 3 or 4 weeks, actually within the third week, I had her out walking with me on leash. Um, we did a couple hours out in the neighborhood at night, chasing rabbits together. When I started back towards the kennel, she literally wrapped her head around the front of my leg, trying to push me away. She knew we were. She knew she was going back to the kennel. She wanted to go with me. She wanted to stay out with me.
Yep.
So that's what
That's a
can
lot.
happen within 3 weeks if you take your time and you do it on their basis, what's important to them. So I don't know where we started on this, but I was trying to give an example of taking your time and respecting the dog's
Yeah.
wishes, not the human wishes.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I answered the question or not.
No, you answered, and I've had ever since working with you, I've gotten to places where I've done what we talked about before. Maybe the dog comes over to me, and I'm not trying to pet it. I keep asking them, "What didn't I do that everybody else does?" And like eventually, like, you didn't try to pet the dog. Maybe then the dog might come and put its head here. I do use a little, probably more food than you do, but I will maybe give a scruff under the chin.
Yeah,
A lot of people immediately go up top, and I feel
yeah,
taking the patience to, okay, you came to me, maybe I give a little bit of a scruff, that's it.
yeah.
And this could be after the third visit or more,
It's
and a
just
lot of times people just go,
it's a
yeah,
connection. If they're
yep,
asking for a connection, that's all you do.
mm-hmm,
You don't try to love it. You don't try to, again, you
mm-hmm,
don't put an emotion into it. They're asking for a connection of some sort.
yep,
A dog, people, there are so many signals. If a dog walks by you and you see the tail curl toward you and just barely touch your leg as it goes
mm-hmm,
by, that's a connection point.
yeah, small,
And that's an important connection right there. It's a
yeah,
signal to you of trying to, ask for interaction. You don't go crazy then and then try to love the
yeah,
dog. It's just a connection, and it's a sign of respect both ways. Frankly, I
yeah,
love those little signals like that because you're starting to. That's where you don't break that trust. You don't
yeah,
go off and do stupid, idiot human primate things.
yeah.
So
One thing,
yeah, it takes time to gain the trust, and if you sometimes if you here's one of the things that people working with fearful or feral animals um, make a mistake. They'll do something and the dog recoils and they recoil and start chattering. That's the
mm-hmm,
worst thing you can do. Just
mm-hmm,
stay there calmly. Don't even move. Don't look at the dog. And
mm-hmm,
then, if the dog moves away, then you turn away from the dog and calmly don't stand straight up, but actually move away from the dog as you're
mm-hmm,
standing up.
yeah,
That's an important element, because if you stand straight up, what did you do? It's like a bear who's, on their
yeah,
fours,
challenging.
and all of a sudden they stand up, you know, and become dominant, uh, yeah, and threatening. So,
One thing I wanted to bring up that I see a lot and I hear a lot is a lot of times fearful dogs can be more comfortable with females rather than males. Can you talk a little bit about that and why? Um,
yeah, yeah, I get all the time as, oh, my dog's afraid of males, and I just smile. It has nothing to do with male or female. It's the way our species, the female or the male of our species, carries themselves.
mhm,
It's the signal that we're putting out because, body position, movement, posture, intent,
mhm,
distance, speed, all of those things are part of their language. And so, men in our species carry themselves differently than women.
yep,
And so it's that how can I put it? I'll say cockiness, but it's not even cockiness. It's just the way men, through culture, through DNA, through
mhm,
everything else, carry themselves or feel they have to carry
yep,
themselves, um, that women don't. Women are softer, nurturing, all of those things generally, and I'm not trying to be sexist. It's just the way we are. And men are the hunter, protector, all of that stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the way we carry ourselves. We see other men as threats, period. And
Yeah.
so you got to puff your chest out and suck your gut in and act all tough and all that stuff, even though you don't know what the hell you're doing and you're scared to death. But that's the way men carry themselves. They're
Yeah.
supposed to be in charge. They're supposed to know all this stuff when they don't. And so when they walk into a room with that presence, the dog, especially a fearful dog, is going to stay away from them. When you enter a room more like a dog does and ignore that dog, I don't ever have problems with dogs that people say, oh, fearful of men, and within 5 minutes the dog's over there, with me being my buddy.
Yeah.
So it's it's the way you present yourself. It's the
Yeah.
I don't mean some ephemeral thing of energy, but it's the energy you project.
Yeah. I have another question, and it actually brings me up to something else. I'll put it up here from Casey Davis. I have a feral dog at my house. Still can't touch her after 2 years. Do they ever come around? And to me, that brings me to Krista Melito, with Adam and the work she's
Yeah,
done. And
yeah,
I was just at a workshop there with Chad, and the progress he's made. He was coming up and he actually gave a lot of us his bum and let us pet it. And
yeah,
he's being a lot more confident, again, on his terms, which is fine. But
yeah,
from when he got there to now, it's amazing progress. So I wanted to bring that up with
yeah.
this question.
Yeah, I mean, Adam, I did a workshop at Krista's place a couple of
Yep.
years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, I was able to spend some time with Krista, even in the vehicle where Adam would typically react, and I showed her um, how to work with him even in those situations, which
Mm-hmm.
were chaotic, threatening, heavy traffic in downtown Philly, and all that stuff. And so she's been able to make a lot of progress with things because of her change of understanding and behavior. Um, and that's, you have to see it from that individual's. That's really what work the dog in front of you
Yep.
means. You
Yeah.
have to see from the dog's perspective, that individual dog, its experiences, and how it behaves. Um, I'll give you an example. Been a little over 2 years ago. I did a workshop up in Seattle, or well, Washington State,
It's
at
Bill.
Bill's place. Yeah,
Nice.
Bill Church, and a a I'll call it long distance client of mine. People that I had a few phone conversations and emails and different stuff, Facebook stuff back and forth with, over about 4 or 5 years, I guess. Uh, at that time, they had a wolf dog, female wolf dog, that they had they'd had for, I think at that point, 5 years, and at that, even to that time, um, the animal, she had made progress. The lady had made progress with, and this is a person who actually is a professional in the dog world, trainer, or actually kennel boarding, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so a lot of experience, has gun dogs. I mean, they know stuff. But they couldn't reach this wolf dog. So over the years, I think within 3 years' time, she had made a lot of progress with the dog, but he had not. The dog wouldn't even, if he was in the house, it'd be 2 a.m. before the dog would even come in the house, making sure he was asleep, and then would get up and leave beforehand. So wouldn't even come anywhere near him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so they were one of the first there that first day for the workshop. They drove up, and um, she brought the wolf dog for her as handler, and he brought one of their other dogs. And so walked up. introduced myself. I recognized them, of course. We'd never met before, and I'd never seen their dogs, firsthand. And so, um, again, quote unquote, ignoring the dog, which I wasn't. She was
Mhm.
handling it, and within about 5 minutes, I had squatted down and I just asked for the leash. She gave me the leash. Um, this female turned, came up next to me, and I was actually even able to put my entire arm over her and pat her on the side with her up against my leg, and then we go for a walk. So within 5 minutes, and the man says, you've done more with her in 5 minutes than I have in 5 years.
Mhm.
So what do you present yourself? So if you already have a relationship with an animal, it takes a while to change that because they already have patterns and expectations. So if you change, you have to expect those timelines that I mentioned before, 3 days, 7 to 10 days, 21, 30, 90. You have to go through those patterns again because you've changed this massive variable, which is you. So you've changed the relationship, you've changed the patterns, you've changed the situations this dog has to learn. And so, that wolf dog. Of course, I've dealt with so many of them. I know their nature and behavior anyway.
Mhm.
So, um, you present yourself in certain ways, and the reason I'm saying it that way is because I can't teach it to you in over Facebook in an hour.
Exactly.
Uh,
Exactly.
I have a 9-day course that just begins to introduce you to the idea of how
Mhm.
to exist with a dog. So,
Definitely.
yeah,
On a fun point, Jen was talking about how dogs can be picky with different people, and she
yeah,
mentioned here how Han, big lovable Han, still doesn't like random people touching his fur, and he wants to
yeah.
be admired from a distance.
Right. I don't either.
Yeah, me neither. You know, but it all comes back to that. So I think a lot of it comes back to the fearful dogs is respecting the dog, giving them time, letting them just be a lot more than um, expecting too much for them. But I think also sometimes we have to help guide them. So what are ways? I
You
know
don't
also
go to the
past
gas
time. Yeah.
station. You don't go to the gas station and see some woman next to you pumping gas, and you go over and just start hugging her and kissing
Uh
her
huh.
and talk to her. It's ridiculous. Again, stop thinking in terms of human and
Mm-hmm.
start thinking of in terms of that animal. That animal, first of all, it isn't a fur baby. It's not
Yeah.
a four-legged furry human baby.
Yeah. It's an apex
Uh,
predator, right?
it, it is an apex predator, and they have a predatory mind. That's the way they think of the universe.
Yeah.
Just because we see it as something cute, we want to nurture because it's small and that's in our DNA and our brain and the way we think, doesn't mean it wants to have anything to do with you. And so, having a little respect for that animal, if
Mm-hmm.
that was a bear, if it was a bear around on a leash, I bet you
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't go over and pet it.
Nope.
Well, that's the way you need to think about it.
Yeah.
So,
Definitely.
yeah,
Um,
have some respect.
Real quick, another question here, and let me know when you have to go. I just a lot of questions are coming in here. Everybody's loving all the information you're giving.
Yeah.
Here we go. How do you feel about calming aids, medication for dogs? Some trainers swear by them. How do you feel about, in general, about medication, calming aids, CBD oil, all that stuff that's out there these days?
Okay. So, for instance, we'll take you know scented oils and stuff like that as an example. Um, it may it may help because it may influence the dog in ways that it brings it back to natural or nature.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually recommended, for instance, as scent in when I help with veterinarian clinics or animal hospitals or stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. I recommend to them to have fragrant uh, uh, herb plants in pots
Interesting.
in their reception room and in their treatment rooms as well, because it brings the outdoor in. It's something that, look, dogs can smell every scent. They smell the fear, they smell the medication, they smell blood, they smell urine, they smell all of that stuff in there. They always will. That's why they react the way they do in the vet's office. Plus, they have
Sure.
experience. But if you give them something else that's very fragrant, they can rub up against, for instance, when they walk in the door and there's a Thai basil plant there in a pot, they rub
Mm-hmm.
up against it. That brings in a different type of uh, mental memory, if you will, that helps calm them down, that it relates to something. So, yes, those sort of things can work. As far as an overall, there's some placebo effects to some of these things for the human, as the human
Mm-hmm.
will work. So there's three elements here. One is a placebo effect for the human, certain it will work, and so they behave differently and they affect the dog. The other is it can help the dog relate in a different way. It doesn't mask anything, but it adds to an experience. And
Mm-hmm.
then the third is it actually affects a dog, like CBD oil.
Mm-hmm.
It actually affects the brain and behavior by changing the way the dog feels. Some of that's good, some of that's bad. I will
Mm-hmm.
tell you that probably, just thinking back on the dogs that have uh, come to me that have been placed on um, different drugs for behavioral issues, um, I will not work with a dog on drugs. I want them
Mm-hmm.
to get with their vet, do the proper weaning of that so that I can actually see and work with the dog that's really there.
Mm-hmm.
And of those, I would say close to 95 to 96% of those dogs didn't need that stuff. But there is a percentage, 2 to 5%, that actually it did assist and help, and we put them
Yeah.
back on it, but at a lower level. Once you work with the dog, get it to understand humans better, and vice versa. So
Great.
yeah, there's really three elements to it. One is the placebo effect that actually works on the human, because the human is more confident about working with the dog in certain situations. Two
Mm-hmm.
is it relates to something else in nature that it's more calm and confident about. Or three, it actually affects the behavior because of some neurological or physical effect on the dog itself. Those are the three categories that I see.
Great, great answer. A lot of great insight there. Do you have a little more time to answer questions? Do you have to go?
Sure.
Okay.
No, I'm just hungry.
Yeah.
It's lunchtime.
That's a little earlier there, I know. And okay, so let's see here. We have a bunch of questions here. Everybody who's posting questions, I'm not going to go too specific to each individual problems or solving a fear, aggression, and stuff like that right now. We're just trying to get overall questions about fearful dogs and helping them. That's really what it's about. Let's see what we got here.
So, by the way, hi, Jen.
Hi, Jen. Hi, Valerie.
Jen,
Hi, everybody.
say hello to Han for me. Hey, Val.
To answer the question, I was asked about Adams, if there's a story or progress. Chris, I don't think he's written anything up, but you can follow a lot of about Adam on Krista's Philly Pack page.
She should write something up, because
Definitely.
she's done a great job. It's a great story as far as the progress and what she's learned and been through. So it's actually wonderful to see.
Okay, so there was a question here by somebody I'm working with just about getting dogs outside and on leash and uncomfortable. And you did talk about it with your story. Is there anything you can provide as an insight with leash work? We have to have our dogs on leash in a city environment here and get them outside and get comfortable in these urban environments. There's a bunch of people that I've worked with and people have talked about here. Any recommendations to getting comfortable with the leash on and getting them into the outside environment on leash and moving around.
Yeah, it's
If,
much like any other issue that you have with a dog. I cannot tell you how many times, probably a couple of hundred times a year, a trainer will call me up, not the same trainer, different. Boy, that guy needs help. No, it's the same trainer. Um, Different trainers with different issues, and I you always meet whatever the issue is head on, but that doesn't mean you push the dog through it. What it means is you create an exercise, whatever the dog is, or whatever issue you have with the dog, you create an exercise to teach the dog what your intent is, what it means, and how you do something. So to put a dog on leash, calm, composed, and
Mhm.
understand what the leash is for, you have to plan out what you want to do to create that situation. Dogs don't know what you mean by having a leash on them, or they
Mhm.
can't escape, all those things. That's why you have leash reactivity with dogs,
Mhm.
because they can't escape. So you've taken away their first and primary means of dispute resolution, which is run away, get out of there. Don't be in that situation. So the avoidance aspect you've taken away by putting a dog on a leash. So how does a dog trust that you can handle it? That's where you have to learn what is important to the dog, not to the human.
Mhm.
Dog doesn't know that these people, on Queens Boulevard aren't going to come over and eat us. You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't know anything about that. So you have to be calm, composed, confident, and lead the dog, literally and figuratively, in
Yeah.
ways the dog understands and can follow you. And so, creating a dog who's not just willing to, but wants to get on leash without excitement, go out with you. You have to take each step of the way and show the dog, this is what I mean here.
Mhm.
You don't just drag them outside and say, deal with it, suck it up, crybaby. Okay, I do that
Mhm.
to humans, not to dogs. Suck it up, crybaby. Um, but so what you do is you create an exercise to show the dog what each step of the way means, and that nothing bad happens. As a matter of fact, good stuff
Mhm.
happens. What
Mhm.
good stuff? Well, for me, I don't use treats. What I use is me, my happiness for the dog.
Mhm.
So it becomes relationship based. Gee, where did my name come from? Anyway, it becomes relationship based, where the dog is excited and happy to be with me and wants to. So
Mhm.
now we're working together as a team, and the dog can trust me because I'm showing it. I'm taking the time to show it each step of the way what this means. Let's do this. Great, good boy. That's my buddy. Okay, let's step over here. Excellent. Okay, let's open this door. That's great. Let's step outside. Okay, that's great. Now let's go back in. So
So
you don't
small
just immediately,
steps.
small steps. You never rush past one step, because if you do, you have miscommunicated.
Yeah.
You've broken that pattern and that trust, and now the dog doesn't know. Look, communication is about clarity.
Mhm.
It's the way I communicate with humans, dogs, or anybody else is A, B scenarios. A is very obvious, and B is completely separate and obvious as well. There's no muddiness to those two signals.
Mhm.
And so the dog learns from that. Well, B is better for me.
Mhm.
Okay, so now let's try B again. Now let's fine tune B.
Mhm.
So, A, you're getting a behavior in a certain way, then you give an opposite response to that behavior to the dog, then the dog has to experiment and say, well, how do I, it's never gotten that response before.
Yeah.
Dog charges at me and goes, "Arr," and I stand there not even looking at the dog, and the dog goes, what's wrong with this guy? Is he crazy? Does he know something I don't know? So now he's got to stop and pause and think about, well, how do I get through to this guy? I'm not affecting him at all. So now you are affecting the dog, not the dog affecting you,
Yeah.
which is I don't negotiate with dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is I influence the dog, not the other way around,
Yeah.
because I know where I need them to go, but it's step by step by step. It's small increments. And so you teach the dog what you have each time. Let's talk about the leash. The leash is a tool. That's all it
Mm-hmm.
is.
Yeah.
And what I tell trainers and everybody else is if you have to use the leash to physically control the dog, you are not reaching it mentally. Think about that. So
Mm-hmm.
all of my work is based upon that. I want the dog, it knows it's attached. There's no use in forcing it. So let's work together.
Mm-hmm.
That's respect, and then it respects you back. You get a much better, deeper, faster relationship that way to not force a dog using a leash or any other tool, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
It's a communicative device. That's all
Yeah.
it is. You're trying to communicate, and that's really what your ultimate goal is to
Yeah.
communicate with this other animal, this other species, clearly. So that's what all the focus is about.
Yeah. Clear communication.
Yep.
So
Yep.
Julie Hart has the same question as Tracy
Hey, Julie.
Franken. Hey,
Hey,
what
Tracy.
should we look for to know when to adopt out a foster dog? What is the ideal progression point when they go from foster care? And my personal opinion is sometimes dogs, a lot of times, should be in foster care a little longer to help that decompression period before they get adopted the best we can. And I know that's hard, but what is
Yeah,
the
this is
ideal progression point in your mind?
wow.
Yeah,
Well,
I
that's
know
a
it's
whole different
Julie.
land. That's a different universe altogether in rescue because it depends on the rescue as far as
Mm-hmm.
uh, their processes, procedures, and their understanding of their volunteers, their board, and all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if they are going to, here's what I would say with rescue groups: if you're going to take on fearful animals, give them the time.
Mm-hmm.
Period. You will find, I've helped rescues out. I helped a number of rescues over the years. I continue to help a few rescues because a lot of them have either taken courses from me. I've helped them out with their personal dogs or whatever else over the years, and so they've learned, but they're also structured correctly in the first place to care and allow that, and so those what they do is they come up with procedures and they understand that if they're going to take on these dogs, they give them the time. I had actually several. There was a group of actually uh, feral born and feral uh, existing dogs in the mountains of southeast Oklahoma. And yeah, Oklahoma actually has mountains. Um,
A few.
a few, but yeah, it's pretty rugged territory. But those there was a pack of at least 15, I think, Siberian Huskies. How they got out there, I don't know, but they were surviving quite well. Don't know why they tried to capture them, but they did. They captured 9 of the 15, is what I remember. And Tulsa SPCA or whoever it was had those animals for I think a year and couldn't do anything with them. And so the Husky Rescue Group here in Texas, actually Texas Husky Rescue, which is probably one of the best rescue groups I've ever run across.
Nice.
Also, the largest Husky Rescue in the United States. They usually have 70 to 90 dogs at a time,
Wow.
all Husky. Um, they agreed to take them on. And so they get them down, and within a short few days, they go, "Now, son." so, so I met with fosters and different people with all 9 of those, and I ended up taking 3 of them on myself, the more severe ones that were
Mm-hmm.
really, really fearful animals. By the way, I've never been bitten by a feral animal. Never.
Knocking
They
on some wood for you.
no, they just don't want to. They don't want to deal with you.
Okay.
You know, they they know how to survive. They're feral. They don't want conflict in the
Yeah.
wild. Then you die. So, if you're maimed or hurt or anything else, the reality
Yeah.
of a truly feral situation is, I don't want to encounter something that could hurt me.
Yeah.
That's not survival. That's just stupidity.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, I had three of these animals. I think one, Ellie, was probably the mother of most of them. I only had her 3 months, 2 or 3 months. Worked with her, and then Penny and Rigby I had for 16 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, who would ever come along and be able to work with these dogs in the way that they need to because they're different.
Mm-hmm.
Sure enough, right people came along, and they were adopted out, and then they
Nice.
continued to work. They continue to work. I've helped them, etc. So that's a commitment on the part of the rescue group to say, if we're going to work with truly fearful animals,
Mm-hmm.
we need to give them whatever time it is, and you
Yeah.
also have to find the right combination of people. It's incumbent upon them to do it. It's their responsibility to do so.
Yeah. It's hard. The right fosters and then even the
Yes.
right adopters. It's a process, but it makes the biggest difference. I've seen that. Really
Yes.
appreciate that. So here's a dog I know and people I know, Shauna, asking about, would love to hear more about behavior proofing. Our fearful dog has a wonderful bond with us and people he loves, but we
Yeah.
struggle introducing him to scary new things, which we still discover after years of living with him.
Yeah. So,
That's,
so fearful dogs. Sometimes that is their character and personality. It's not
mm-hmm,
just something that they've learned from being in situations. I've taken some feral and fearful animals and literally changed them. You see a dog explode out of this shell, and they're just happy and everything else, and they become a
mm-hmm,
normal dog. Those are not the severe cases. The ones that are character and personality types that are timid, fearful, don't want to encounter things. We have humans that too. So not all dogs are just going to be, cute little fluffy
yeah,
and want to get along. So um, proofing behavior is over time. Obviously, I mean, a dog gets used to patterning and conditioning
mm-hmm,
and understanding its environment that it's in. But a fearful dog, one that's a behavior type or personality,
mm-hmm,
um, a fearful dog, anything new is going to be a threat,
yeah,
and so they don't know how to encounter it. So you have to, once again, step by step, first in low distraction areas, and this is what I do with these types of animals. I will take them to low distraction areas or low threat areas, such as wide open spaces outdoors. You don't just take them into a restaurant situation, where you're on an outdoor deck and people are stepping over them and stuff like
mm-hmm,
that. You can't. So you take them to a big open area, a big open park or something, and you go back to that spot over and over again and get them to be comfortable in that, because situations are going to happen even in those low distraction, low
yeah,
threat areas. And over time, they learn to deal with it. Then you change location and effort. Again, it's that cumulative, step by step aspect, and it's a half of a parabolic curve essentially. So
mm-hmm,
as you allow the dog to gain trust in itself, which is the ultimate goal, that's the proofing of behavior. It starts making its own decisions in those situations and gives you the right answer. That's proofing the dog. It's not that it's comfortable with you. It's not that it's comfortable with the places that you put it in.
mm-hmm,
It's that it becomes comfortable with itself in those situations, with
yep,
or without. That's the proofing of behavior, not situational training or anything like that. So uh, you you have to. We think in certain ways. Humans think in certain ways and say, well, this is just like that. If I took it to this Home Depot, it should be fine in this other Home Depot.
yeah,
No, it
it's
smells
not the
different. It
same.
sounds different. They're different things. it's an entirely different atmosphere and different situation for that dog. So you have to understand it again from its viewpoint and introduce it to it may be it's like vet office. I tell people uh, take your dog to the vet, introduce it to the
Mm-hmm.
people behind the counter, have them give it treats, and then leave. Come back again, repeat,
Mm-hmm.
rinse, what we call going through the car wash. You
Yeah.
get out, you drive your car, you get it dirty, and you go through the car wash again. So, um, you know, you are. It's not a desensitization. Desensitization is different than repatterning.
Yeah.
So desensitization can work with certain stimuli and things like that, but this is really to repattern and reprogram the brain to not just accept but enjoy these new situations, and that takes a lot of time. I
Yeah.
hope I
Something I
answered
hear
that.
you saying a lot is patterns. And a lot of it's
Yes.
about patterns and getting comfortable with that patterns, which to me also brings back the importance of structure to
Yeah.
help a lot of that
Yeah.
patterns, structure,
Absolutely.
familiarity in the situation that they're in so they can
Yeah.
trust the situation.
Correct. But you also don't want to with a fearful dog. If you are here's what I call cycling. Cycling is really within patterns, and the cycling is
Mm-hmm.
where um, how you work with a brain. You cycle back and forth between a situation, a behavior, a location, all of these things, a proximity to a stimulus or a threat.
Mm-hmm.
And if you move, I will use it in terms of location or distance. If you move forward and then you move back and say that was great, we dealt with that, and then you move
Mm-hmm.
forward again and then you move back and then you move a little further forward and then you move back, then the dog begins to understand. After two or three times it's going, uh-oh, we're going to move even closer next time.
Okay.
You have to break up the cycling to where you move further forward. The next time you don't move as far, the next time you move even farther, so the dog can't predict. And these are small increments again, so the dog
Mm-hmm.
can't predict ahead of time, because then you create anxiety before you even go out. So patterning, for instance, when you work with a dog and you take it out and you go, okay, we're going to go
Mm-hmm.
here, next time we're going here, the next time we're going here, now the dog is beginning to have anxiety of distrust of going out to another crazy place that it doesn't understand. So you have to cycle going back and forth back to the original place that it can trust, so it doesn't anticipate and have anxiety about going out in the first place. And so when we think, okay, for instance, let's talk about Brooklyn. You take a dog out on the sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same sidewalk in the same buildings, but it's different people in different cars. So
Every day.
every time
Yep.
it's entirely chaos. It's total
Mm-hmm.
chaos to them. They don't understand it. So that's where you have to have a lower distraction area, or create a pattern where you don't go as far. Let's just, because survival is about controlling environment. And if we've got a territory, but everything changes in the territory every time we go out, it's chaos.
Yeah.
And with a fearful dog, you're going to create
Yeah.
even more distrust. Make
Great,
sense?
great point. Let's start wrapping it up. I know it's been a long, long conversation, but I know people are loving it. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Jen had a question. She's saying, "Hi, dog dad, and Jason. I'm not sure if Lisa's still
My
watching, but
dog daughter.
a female pit bull. She has situational seizures. Of course, only in intense, stressful situation. Thoughts?" And she's actually goes more into it.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's pushing a dog over the edge. When you know
Okay.
you have a dog, when you know you have a dog, even though it's perfect obedience and everything else, yes, it's acquiescing and it's taking command from human. Doesn't mean it can handle it. So you back off from that and you work in a lower stress situation. You even go to the same, once again, cycle back to the same location, pattern, et cetera, that the variables don't change too much to where
Yeah.
it can be comfortable. And so that's where I see a lot of situations, and I try to help trainers and people all over the world with understanding that if you see those sorts of things, you may have to back off from what you're trying to push this dog into.
Yeah.
It Each one's an individual, and each one can only handle a certain amount. And so when you hear stuff like that, then you say, well, let's back off. Let's go back to the places where the dog is comfortable, doesn't have those situational seizures,
Mm-hmm.
and let's just work with it in that. Let's get it to be a happy, trustful dog, because the more that you create situations that the dog goes into a seizure, the less it can trust you to put it in those situations. Remember,
Yeah.
it goes in this order. Dog has to trust you first because you're the big bear. It has to trust the situations you put it in. Then it can trust itself in those situations. That's the
Yeah.
order it always goes in. And so if you continually put it into situations that it doesn't trust and it overwhelms it or overloads it, then you're never going to get to that third point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, great info, great info. So we're gonna wrap up here so you can get some food. And thank you for taking the time. Um,
My
there's a
pleasure.
lot of
Thanks very
comments
much. This
here.
was a great topic, with one that's really hits me in the heart
Yeah,
because,
me too.
like I said, I've learned more from fearful and feral
Hmm.
animals than any other type. This is where you really learn something, but you also
Yeah,
you learn what the timing and the sequencing and uh, the abilities of dogs are with these guys.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I'm obviously new to the industry and learning, and I love it. And thank you again for the time you take outside of this to talk to me and help me understand what these dogs are saying, because it's so subtle, and the more we can understand, the better we can communicate with them. And I feel that's so important, especially these days with all the situations we're putting them in. So again, thank you for your time. Maybe we'll do it again.
pleasure.
There's a lot of questions here. We tried it
Okay.
the best we can. And
Yeah.
have a great day,
Thanks,
Nelson.
Jason.
Yes.
Thanks, Jason. I was honored. Appreciate it, guys.
My honor was
All
all
right.
mine. I'll post links to Nelson's info in here. I know Valerie also has been great at posting informations about your great workshops, the 3-day, the 9-day, and all the great information that you have.
Appreciate it.
If you don't know about Nelson, go check out his workshops and learn from this man. He'll definitely help you help dogs. Have a great one.
Thanks.
Thank everybody.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.